I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. It was estimated that at the time of his death, Abraham Lincoln was the most photographed person in the world. And it wasn't even close. I'm going to tell you a lot of things about Abraham Lincoln that you probably never knew. And I'll explain why he was so popular and why his image was used on everything from advertisements to playing cards. I'm also going to cover some of the strange conspiracy theories surrounding his death, so be sure to watch until the end. If you enjoy this video and learn something new, please make sure to like and share. Also, stick around until the end, because I have another video about one of America's greatest presidents that you will definitely want to see. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, near Hodgenville, Kentucky. His father was Thomas Lincoln and his mother was Nancy Hanks. But sadly, his mother would die when Abraham was only 9 years old. And just 7 years later, his father would also pass away, leaving Abraham an orphan at the age of 21. Despite these tragedies, Abraham was able to educate himself by reading books that were owned by neighbors. In fact, throughout his life, Abraham was known to be a voracious reader and is reported to have read over 2,000 books. This helped him develop his skills with the English language, which is evident when you look at some of the famous speeches that he gave during his life, such as the Gettysburg Address. At the age of 23, Abraham moved to New Salem, Illinois, where he began working at a local store. It was here that he became acquainted with John Hanks, the brother of his deceased mother. John had a daughter named Mary, who was just 14 years old at the time. And even though Abraham was 9 years older than her, they ended up getting married. The two were married for 26 years and had 4 sons together, 3 of which survived to adulthood. In 1834, Abraham was elected to the Illinois State Legislature, serving 1 term before running for the U.S. House of Representatives. He served in the House from 1847 to 1849. And while there, he met someone who would change the course of American history, a man named Stephen Douglas. The two men became friends and colleagues, but their friendship wouldn't last long. You see, in 1858, Stephen Douglas proposed the idea of popular sovereignty, which stated that the residents of any territory could vote on whether or not to allow slavery. And this idea did not sit well with Abraham Lincoln, who believed that slavery should be abolished entirely. In response to Douglas's proposal, Lincoln challenged him to a series of debates, which resulted in what many historians consider to be one of the greatest political debates of all time. As fate would have it, this debate caused Abraham Lincoln to become a household name across the United States. And it didn't take long for people to start showing their support for him by commissioning artists to paint his portrait and for photographers to capture his likeness. When the Civil War broke out 4 years later, Abraham Lincoln became President of the United States, and since then, he has become one of the most beloved presidents in American history. Some of his accomplishments include issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, helping to abolish slavery in the United States, delivering the Gettysburg Address, winning the Civil War and restoring the nation, helping to establish the National Academy of Sciences, and being the first president to have his picture on a postage stamp. But today, I want to focus on a different aspect of President Lincoln's life, his personal life. I'm going to share some amazing stories that illustrate his character, as well as dispel some of the myths and rumors that surround him. You may not realize it, but when President Lincoln was alive, he was a national celebrity. Crowds would follow him everywhere he went just to catch a glimpse of him. And people would stop whatever they were doing whenever he entered a room. So if you were a photographer back in the day, having the opportunity to take his picture was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One of the most famous pictures ever taken of Abraham Lincoln was done by an African-American photographer named Matthew Brady. The photograph shows Lincoln sitting in a chair with his arms crossed. What makes this picture so unique is that it was taken using a technique called the carte de visite, which allowed multiple copies to be made from the same negative. This led to millions of copies of this particular photo being sold, more than any other president at the time. People would put these pictures on everything from calendars to Christmas cards, as well as use them as trading cards. And I mentioned earlier that people would stop whatever they were doing whenever he entered a room. Well, it got so bad that he started wearing disguises just to be able to walk down the street. One of his most common disguises was a hat, a cape, and a pair of dark glasses. Another one was a stovepipe hat and a shawl wrapped around his face. Even though he tried to hide, people still recognized him and would mob him wherever he went. That's why his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, tried to keep him away from the windows whenever company was coming over. It's no secret that Abraham Lincoln was a very tall man, standing at 6 feet 4 inches. But do you know that he wasn't the only tall man in his family? His son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was also very tall, standing at 6 feet 5 inches. Robert was Abraham Lincoln's second oldest son and was only 23 years old when his father was assassinated. Throughout his life, Robert followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a lawyer and serving in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. After the war, he became his father's aide and traveled with him on the train that fateful night when he was shot. Robert was the one who cradled his father as he died. Sadly, Robert would also die on the same train. The cause of his death was never confirmed, but it's believed that he took his own life. Now, you might be surprised to hear that the signature top hat that Abraham Lincoln is always pictured wearing was actually a gift from a famous actor named John Wilkes Booth. Yes, that John Wilkes Booth. The story goes that John Wilkes Booth sent the hat to Abraham Lincoln after he performed a play in Washington, D.C., in which Lincoln was in attendance. A few months later, when Lincoln was preparing for his first inaugural address, he asked for a suitable hat to wear. Someone suggested the hat that had been given to him by John Wilkes Booth, and so he wore it during the address. This was just a few weeks before the Civil War began, and the irony of the situation is just too much to handle. And speaking of John Wilkes Booth, there are some who believe that Lincoln was not actually killed by him, but instead it was a plot that John Wilkes Booth and Abraham Lincoln's own son, Robert, concocted in order to end the Civil War and bring attention to Robert. The theory goes that Robert Todd Lincoln wanted to be seen as the hero who ended the war, and so he set up his father to be killed by John Wilkes Booth. There is absolutely no evidence to support this claim, but it's still one of the most popular Abraham Lincoln conspiracy theories out there. Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was considered to be one of the most controversial first ladies in U.S. history. She was often seen as being overly critical of others and had a reputation for being difficult to work for. In fact, when she asked her husband for a divorce, he reportedly told her, "If anyone not mentally sound can talk rationally about the matter, let them be brought in. But if they merely jabber, let them be put away." While Mary Todd Lincoln certainly had her faults, Abraham clearly loved her, and there's no doubt that she loved him as well. When he was killed, she went insane with grief and spent the last 17 years of her life moving from place to place, never staying in one location for very long. Abraham Lincoln was known to be a very humble man, despite his success. In fact, he once said, "I don't like flattery. It tastes like vanity." He was also known to be very frugal and was often seen wearing the same clothes for weeks at a time. However, he did have one vice, and that was his addiction to sweets. He was particularly fond of Mrs. Kennedy's cakes and would often send his staff to pick up boxes of them from her shop. Unfortunately, this addiction took its toll on his health and contributed to him being overweight for most of his life. Despite his size, he was known to be very athletic and enjoyed playing sports such as wrestling. In fact, he was known to be a formidable wrestler and was only pinned twice in his entire career. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably never realized how many interesting and strange facts there were about Abraham Lincoln. If you enjoyed this video, then check out my other videos, including the one I mentioned earlier about America's greatest presidents, and I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and share. Thanks for watching.